When you would close your eyes and pay attention to the odors around you, could you actually name some of the odors you're perceiving right now?
No, I couldn't, because I have been in this room already for a while, and so I'm completely adapted, because you know the sense of smell adapts completely. And moreover, this is my room, it's my working room, and I have no unexpected smells here. And so that means that when I come in, there is really not something that excites me. And this is principally the basis of the new theory that we have developed.
In your latest publication, together with Per Möller and Jos Moyet, you propose a new theory of odor perception, the misfit theory of spontaneous, conscious odor perception, MITSCOP for short. Why is there a need for a new theory?
I think there is a need for a new theory because we have so far underestimated or misinterpreted the role that memory, odor memory, plays in our life. And actually the subtitle is Reflections on the Role of Memory in Olfactory Perception. Memory helps us not to notice odors. And that is a very special thing because normally memory helps you to notice things. But in this case, you do not notice the odors if they are known to you. And it's called the misfit theory because as soon as there is a misfit between your expectations, and the odors that you encounter, you notice them, and you all of a sudden want to know where they come from. For instance, you do not smell your own house normally, but if you come into it and there is another odor, then you must go and find what it is. But if not, if there is no other odor, then you do not notice your house odor. They just give you a feeling of being home.
Could you give me a short description of the theory?
Well, the theory says that odors, when we smell an odor, the first thing we do is notice whether we had that odor or whether we never had it. And that is very important because olfaction is the guardian of the two most vital things that we do in life, breathing and eating. And it has to make sure that we do not poison ourselves. So warning is the most important thing. But on the other hand, if we would smell all the odors that we encounter, we would be overloaded with odors because there are hundreds of odors in your house. Every moment, every corner has a different odor. So what the memory does in the first place is when you know the odor, you don't give attention to it anymore. It blocks your attention for it. You can, of course, if you want to, you can always smell it, but it effaces the odor impression, the spontaneous one. So the word spontaneous is very important in it, because you still can perceive odors and you can remember odors, but the other thing is that these odors are always linked to the situation. Your own house is a situation you know, and you do not smell the odors. Houses of other people you smell immediately. And only when in your house there is a misfit, then you will smell it. And that is the quintessence of the theory. Furthermore, it is not so that you remember the odors when you do study odor memory. You remember the situations in which the odors belonged. And the odors themselves you can often not remember at all. But they bring you back a situation, and that is the thing that is remembered. And that is very different from what many people think. But people think that you remember the odor itself as such, but no. You remember the situations in which they came.
You question the ecological validity of olfactory experiments which involve the identification of odors. Odors, you emphasized, were not meant for identification. Yet many experiments rely on exactly that feature. Did olfactory research take a wrong path?
In a way it did, I think, because it was very much modeled after visual experiments or verbal learning experiments. And in vision you have objects that you can show and that people recognize. And recognizing and identifying is important in vision because you can see the things already from a distance. If you have, for instance, enemies coming toward you, it's very important that you identify what the enemy is. If it's a rhino coming running towards you, you better step aside. If it is a small fellow, you hit him on the head. If it's a very big fellow, you smile, and so your reaction to the possible danger is depending on your identification of the danger. In olfaction, that's not the case. In olfaction, if you smell an odor that you do not know, there's only one thing you can do, is keep your breath and get out, or spit it out if it is in your mouth. And so there is no need for identification in a way. And that is why we are so very bad at it. Most people cannot identify over 50% of the things that odors that they encounter. And it has also no purpose to identify. The French, of course, when they eat, they try to identify anything that is in their meal. And I am often with French people at the table. I myself come from a culture where you did not talk about what you eat, but the French do, and they often tell a lot of nonsense. But at the same time, but that is an intellectual game. It is not essential for the working of the odor memory and so on. So identification is a much overrated thing. And the funny thing is that almost all experiments on olfactory memory are about identification. And I think that is the wrong path indeed.
Why is there relatively little research on unconscious odor perception?
Because it's difficult. It's very difficult to find these unconscious things. And it's much more easy to put odors in bottles and put them in front of people and think that you are measuring what odors are in normal life. And I think it's just, again, because people imitate vision or verbal learning and do not realize that for odors you need really different attitudes. And you miss out on the real object that you're studying, because the real object is often the unconscious effects. And there are many unconscious effects. You know, recently in here in the Netherlands, Holland and his co-workers showed that if you put a bucket with a little bit of cleaning substance in the corner, that people will, after eating biscuits, will scrub their tables much more clearly than if you do not have that. And so these are that's a very good example of an unconscious effect. People have no idea that the bucket is there, but the smell in itself, unnoticed as it is, makes them change their behavior.
Which experiment was an important key to develop your theory?
I think the most important point was the experiments I did with Joachim Degel. And we asked people to come into rooms and to do tests there. They were invited for that. And even the experimenters did not know that we had made a little odor. And the odor was so faint that you did not notice it. If you wanted to, you could smell it, but people never did. And so they worked in there and they did psychological tests, and they thought that was the purpose of the thing. And then we did another experiment with them, and that was tasting yogurts. And then we said, oh, before you go, maybe you could take part in another experiment that we have, and that is about how well odors fit to rooms. And you can make a little bit of extra money with that, and all people agreed to do that. And so then we presented them with 12 odors in bottles, among which was the odor that they had been exposed to, and that was either lavender or orange. And we exposed them to 12 rooms, photographs of rooms, among which was the room they had been into, and also another room in which they had been, but without an odor. And then, before we went on, we asked, oh, could you please identify these odors? So they had the 12 odors in front of them, they identified them, and lavender and orange are identified by about 50% of the people. And then we asked them, did you smell any odor in this building? And they had not smelled any odor in that building. And then when we started analyzing the data, we came to the conclusion that the people who had not been able to identify these odors made a strong link of that odor to the room that it had been in. But as soon as they could identify the odor, that link was completely lost, and they were just as they thought it fitted just as much to the room as people who had never been in there. And so it gave me the feeling that identification is disturbing the intimate relationship between odors and the situation they belong to. And that was the key to this theory, I think, that odors that you recognize and that you can identify have lost their normal sense in the normal function. And later, of course, the experiments that I already explained about the food added to it as well. I did that with Jos Moyet, and we did a lot of things, and the fact that people cannot tell what they have had, but that they can tell anything that they have not had is very... And recently we did another experiment, which is not with odor, but which was with weights. We had people pass bottles, odor bottles, for 40 times. And the next day when they came back in the lab, we said, oh, yesterday you passed a lot of these odor bottles. And they weighed 54 grams, and we made them from, say, 48 till 54 till 60. And funnily enough, the people cannot tell which was the one that they had handled every time, but they said of the others, these are too heavy, these are too light. And it means that there is really a different way of, a different form of memory. It is the memory of recognizing the misfits, anything that is not according to your memory. And that these were the experiments that really brought about the theory.
Is there a positive side of not having a strong conscious odor memory or olfactory engram?
Oh, well, perhaps first of all, I explain what engram means. Engram is from the theory of odor objects of Stevenson and Boakes, and they say that the pattern of glomerular responses, which are the direct reflection of the receptor inputs is called the engram. And they think that the engram forms a sort of odor object and that the engram as such is remembered. But in our theory, we say it's not the engram itself that is remembered, because we often do not know what it is. Anything that is new, anything that is not the engram that we had before, is noticed. And this has the great advantage that we do not carry all these engrams with us in our memory, but that they just in the beginning they're checked whether they have been there before or not. And if they have been there, we do not carry them, but we carry the situation in which they occur now. And so for next time, but we do not remember as such the engrams. And it has the advantage of using a lot of, not using a lot of ballast in our brain. I think it's a very effective method. So what we do is we detect change and newness instead of recollecting that what we had. And another thing is there are many arguments for that. For instance, in normal learning procedures, if you make a series of things, you know best what was in the beginning and what was at the end. That does not exist in olfaction. In olfaction, you remember everything as well and as badly as because you do not remember the engrams. So the only thing that you remember is what it made you think of, and that could be in the middle just as well as somewhere else.
Gaillet-Touron and colleagues showed that waiting in a pear-scented room led to more healthy food choices at a dinner later on. Should researchers do more real-life experiments and get out of the lab more often?
I think they should. And I think it is very important. What she did was very nice. She had invited people to come in for dinner, and then they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's not completely ready yet." And they put them in a waiting room. And in the waiting room, they made it very specific. They made either a pear odor or a melon odor. And in France, melon is very much related to melon with ham. And so it is an entree, and pear is only a dessert. And what they noticed is if they had that in that waiting room, they had a pear odor that was just not perceptible. It was perceptible, but it was not noticed. The people would choose desserts, more fruity desserts, and not so much chocolate and heavy stuff. And if they put the melon in, then they would, in the entree, take a salad rather than a pâté or something heavy. So they showed that very specifically these odors were situation related, and showed that very clearly. And we have done a lot of similar things. And for instance, we have worked a lot in places for mentally handicapped. And they're sometimes difficult to get dressed and things like that. And what we used, for instance, was we used the odor of the swimming pool when the people had to dress for going to the swimming pool. And the children immediately did all the things that they wanted, because now they were already in the atmosphere and they enjoyed themselves. And we have done many other things out of the lab that show you how precisely these memories work and how helpful they can be in the normal situations.
I think you also get more information out of these kinds of experiments. I remember one experiment you did in Japan with taxi drivers.
Yes, oh, that was funny. Yeah, well, at that time I worked with Naarden International, and they were the number 4 in the world, and we wanted them to become number 3, of course. And so we tested a lot of odors in different countries, and we wanted to know how acceptable certain odors would be in the country. And one of the things that we did in Tokyo was we put someone at the taxi stand, and he gave the people the taxi drivers, he gave them little odor things in the car. And the only thing he did was stand at the taxi stand, and when they came back, control whether the odor was still in there or not. And it was a perfect way of seeing which odors could be accepted in Tokyo and which not. Because as soon as there was an odor that was a little bit strange and unfamiliar to some person would say, "Oh, that's a nice odor," or they would say, "Oh, what a strange odor you have," and it would be taken out. And so we got, for very little money, we got a lot of information. Another thing we did in that way was we had 3 ladies who went around the world with photographs of typical applications of odors. For instance, a very good photograph of a wash basin with a piece of soap on it, or a cleaned floor. And then they had 20 of these photographs, situations, and they had 50 odors, and they had 100 housewives in the different countries, and they asked the housewives, would this fit to this situation, these odors? And in no time they had all the data on that. And you find out, for instance, that in Spain a toilet should not smell of citrus. It should smell of a warm, flowery odor. Whereas in Germany, citrus would be the best thing in the thing. And the nice thing about it, if you ask people, and that is another thing, so since it is not a conscious thing, if you ask people, does this odor fit the toilet, without showing it, they would not know. But as soon as you made the right photograph, they recognized the situation, and they knew immediately, oh no, that odor not, that odor can go and the other one cannot. And that type of experiments have been very, very fruitful for the business as well.
When situation plays such an important role for odor perception, how dangerous is it then to transfer the finding on odor or flavor perception from one country to another?
Oh, not only from one country to another, you might even say from one person to another, because situations are not the context or something like that. Situations are the thing that you have given a meaning. It is the meaningful situation that we measure. So people differ a lot in the meaning that an odor has because it is linked to their personally lived situation. And we should do much more situational research. And I have at one time proposed situational analysis as the best way of dealing with consumer problems as well. We should know how often, for instance, people eat alone in the kitchen, or eat with friends, or eat with in an official meal, and they should know whether the things that we propose to them are appropriate for these different situations. And that would give a much better idea of what is the chance that these people will eat these things, than just asking, do you like it? And then also, do you like it for the first time that you eat it? Because if you have eaten it several times, you may have a completely different view. So it is, of course, it's dangerous to transpose data from one set to another. We know that certain odors have very special meanings in other cultures, but also they have very special meanings for you and me and all the people around us. There are, if you think of the Proust phenomenon, Proust tells that he dipped a Madeleine cookie into linden tea, and all of a sudden he was placed back in the room of his aunt in Combray before Mass on Sunday. And that type of experiences are very, very personal. And so you cannot say that odors are the same for everybody. Things that we see are much more the same for everybody. Vision has certain laws. We see in the same way. Unfortunately, we all learn to see depth in the same way. Otherwise, we could not cross the street without being overrun, perhaps. But in olfaction, we all have our own olfactory world. And that's why these situations they're very personal, and they often are not generalizable.
What are your recommendations for future research on odor memory?
Well, first of all, I think people should realize that memory of odors is something that we make implicitly, and that means without any intention to remember or to memorize. And all experiments that are trying to make people memorize something are ecologically non-valid, because normally we do not deal with odors in that way, except if you are a professional in the field, but otherwise you do not. So implicit learning is the essential thing. Then later you can try and find implicit methods of checking the memory, or you can do it explicitly. It's not bad to do it explicitly, because you have already captured what was the normal way of memory gathering. And it is important to check often how people remember things. For instance, in the food industry, it's very important to know how your food is remembered, and and you can do the following thing. After a while, you can give people again the same food and say, "You tasted this with us. Is it now better or worse than it was when you had it in the meal that we gave you?" And if they remember it better, then it means that their memory for it was not a very good one. And if they remember it as much worse, then it is very dangerous, because if they buy it again and they eat it themselves again, they may have a deception. And so it is very important also in practical things to check afterwards in things that have been implicitly eaten or smelled, etc., etc.
Do you have any special advice for young scientists who are doing food and consumer research?
I think one of the most important things is not to trust perception alone, and just to measure how people perceive it or how much they like it, and certainly not how they like it the first time. It's essential that people that taste something for the first time, they do not know what they're tasting, and it takes time, and they should at least do repetitive experiments, and then see also how the things that people taste are remembered. So not perception alone, always implicit memory, and follow the development of liking for a product over a number of cases in which you learn to understand it, because many new products are not understood immediately, and people learn to see it better, and in many cases it will, if it is a complex one, it will become more and more liked, and if it is a simple one, it will bore you to death in no time. Think of muesli bars. Muesli bars, when they first came out, everybody loved them. Nobody ate more than 5. And that it was a lesson that they should have tested that a number of times. And that is what I think is very important. And unfortunately, modern marketing research does not do that. They go on first impressions only. And that is a very, very bad way of doing research.
Eb, thank you very much for the interview.